So I am head of comms at Sui Foundation, and as head of comms, I'm always looking for stories. And the most important thing about a story is that people care about it. So one thing that people care about, not the people in this room, but some people care a lot about money. They love talking about it. So having a chance here today to talk to Greg, who's a principal at Franklin Templeton, about finance, DeFi, and how it all works, is extremely exciting. So I want to welcome Greg. Greg, tell us a little bit. I think some people in the audience may not be familiar with Franklin Templeton and obviously you. So I'd love to hear about both of those things. Your background I know is interesting, and Franklin Templeton as well.
Yeah, thank you. Super glad to be here. Appreciate you all not booing me off stage. I understand, I may be in your minds part of the evil empire in regulated traditional finance, but I promise you that I would not put myself in the line of fire up here on stage if that's what we were here for. And so I'm Greg Scanlon. I am a managing principal of the venture capital fund, focused entirely on blockchain at Franklin Templeton. We're an early stage fund, and I'm a part of the digital asset unit at Franklin Templeton. So we've got about 55 people across the digital asset unit, and we've been building in blockchain since 2018. And so we've got now 4 key groups across our digital asset unit. We report directly to the CEO, which for those who can appreciate this at a $1.7 trillion global asset manager, it puts us on par with the largest fixed income and equity units in the world in terms of access to one of the largest asset management CEOs in the world. And so there's significant sway in being in that position, but it reflects how important blockchain and decentralized ledger technology is to Franklin Templeton. So the 4 groups that we have, ourselves, venture capital team, we got a listed token team that simply values listed tokens all day long, runs fundamental and quantitative trading strategies. We've got a nodes team, which I actually helped set up a few years ago when I joined Franklin Templeton. So we run nodes to support the ecosystems that we're invested in, as well as to pull data off chain to understand what's going on. And then the 4th is our digital infrastructure. And so the digital infrastructure, to be very specific, is a licensed and regulated transfer agent on chain. So what did we do? We took a business that is regulated and has been around for 40 to 60 years, and we stuck it in a smart contract. And more specifically, we are the only institution in the world that, for regulated security, has the legal approval to use blockchain, which is a public repository, as the only store of value store of record for ownership for our money market funds, which may commonly be known as Benji for those of you who are familiar. And just out of curiosity, can I take a poll to see who has actually heard of Benji or Franklin Templeton's money market fund on chain? One taker. Thank you. And we had breakfast together. And so just to give you a bit of background, and then I'll be quiet. What it means is on chain right now, similar to how you can go to any broker dealer and purchase a money market fund, you can go onto the Franklin Templeton app and you can immediately own a money market fund. You'll earn yield. You have all the same legal rights as a traditional holder, but it's on chain. And so the reason that's important is because a part of what Franklin Templeton is doing, and we'll probably talk more about this today, is we're trying to close that gap between regulated finance and the crypto world. And so I'll pause there, but we'll certainly go into why Franklin Templeton is looking to do this. And yes, the main driver of this is money, right? Like, we're a public company. We have shareholders. Revenues are ultimately, and more specifically, profitability is ultimately what matters. But there is a key piece of this that lies in efficiency and user experience that drives the profitability of this. And that ethos is why we have focused on blockchain.
Now I know Franklin Templeton is an asset manager, obviously, but also a VC. So I'd like to ask about those two things. So first, as an asset manager, obviously the Bitcoin ETF was big news. How did that sort of impact you? How do you think that's going? Do you think that there are other ETFs coming? Give us like the tea on that. And then secondly, we can talk about VC after you answer that.
So Bitcoin ETF, I think, was very good for both sides of the table, both traditional finance as well as crypto, for a few reasons. One, for traditional finance, the reality is for us crypto natives, we want traditional finance to embrace Web3 and blockchain more and more. They control too much of the financial ecosystem for them to be left out. So we need to onboard them. And what's the best way to onboard traditional finance and really any public entity? It's to hook them with revenues, right? And so that's what the Bitcoin ETF did. For those who don't know, the Bitcoin ETFs have been the fastest growing ETFs by AUM in the history of ETFs. And they are now into the top 5% of AUM for ETFs globally. So they've been undoubtedly a success, and it's allowed traditional finance to understand that there is, in terms of the consumer and institutional investment side, there is appetite and there is money to be made. And on the other side of this, if you're a traditional regulated financial company and you now have an ETF, it's forced you to engage the crypto ecosystem even more. So specifically, if you did not have a protocol or a team set up in order to create and redeem ETFs within Bitcoin, you now have a trader to do that. So you now, at every single one of these financial institutions that has an ETF, they now have a digital asset trader. They're trading Bitcoin, right? And so that's a key step, is just familiarity and function. And so bringing TradFi into this space is super important. I think the other major thing is that it clearly sparked a Bitcoin rally, right? And Bitcoin continues to outperform. So like a little hoorah for regulated finance and what it has meant to see some of the leaders of regulated finance completely pull 180 in the last 18 to 24 months about Web3 blockchain in terms of its value add going forward. Whether it's marketing or not, it's having real impact on those businesses, who they hire and where they interact. And so I think it's super important, and it's a positive for both regulated finance. They're making money, and it's positive for the crypto.
So that's the Bitcoin ETF.
That's a Bitcoin ETF.
So what are the prospects? If we get some love for Ethereum or others?
Well, we got a little bit of bad news yesterday on Ethereum ETF. There was another financial institution out saying essentially that they do not think that it will be approved. There's a number of variables going on here in terms of regulatory trying to decide security versus commodity versus something completely brand new, as well as do we have the infrastructure on the back end to be able to safely provide these ETFs to institutions and consumers. We're certainly proving that out on the Bitcoin side. Ethereum, when it comes to staking, presents a new hurdle. Franklin Templeton is pushing only for a staked Ethereum ETF. We believe that if you're going to offer Ethereum, particularly to long-term holders, you have to offer them the staked ETF. Otherwise, you're essentially doing them somewhat of a disservice. Because of this, it presents a regulatory hurdle. And so I don't have any predictions on when we get those next ETFs, but certainly TradFi is working towards this. They want to be able to deliver more products, but we have to work through some of these issues and the differences between each one of these tokens.
Awesome. The other side is the VC. So I know obviously you guys are invested in a variety of things, including other L1s. an investor in Sui. How did you guys think about? Look, I kind of want to. I'm interested to know how you compare these L1s that you're interested in.
I love it. We're going to start fight here on main stage, and so it's a great question. So a part of my background, how I dove into blockchain is 2020, 2021 when Solana comes out. I'd been aware and participated in Ethereum, Bitcoin, but my background is 15 years long short equity hedge funds, financials, macro trader. And so understanding that throughput is a critical piece of this game. And so when Solana comes out, I start running Validator on Solana. We all know about the stability issues there. It was an excellent education, not only into the architecture of blockchains from different pieces of blockchains, data distribution to consensus mechanism, but also mapping that to the code, because to keep these validators up, right, you have to understand all of the inputs and outputs and what's being communicated from who, what, when, and where. It led me to appreciate greatly stability on chain. With the critical element needed of throughput. Why? Because throughput leads to better unit economics. And the better unit economics that we have, you can think of it either as you can add the longer tail of economic activity, or we're essentially bringing blockchain to the common person, right? And so the cheaper it gets, the more accessible it is. And this is an ethos that I've driven through Franklin Templeton. And so in comparing chains, Sui for sure, Miston Labs, is the best team in all of blockchain for building L1s. I will be unequivocal about that, right? Like, in my mind, the professionalism that exists across that team is unmatched. And it's critical because even just coming at this from a TradFi perspective, where we deal with other people's money on one side, and then we deal with regulators on the other side. And so safety and stability is first and foremost for everything, because one, you don't want to mess with the common person's livelihood. And two, if you do, there are real world consequences for us in that. They will take everything away from you, from your savings to your freedom. And so at other L1s, to say this in a nice way, one of the things that we look at internally from a software engineering perspective at Franklin Templeton is the 365-day liveness test. If you can't pass that, we can't be on you. We can't leverage you. We can't build on you. And there are a number of chains out there in the high throughput space who cannot pass that test today and continue to struggle. Sui is not one of them.
I would mention that we have been 100% uptime since we launched in May, so almost at that year mark.
And so it's incredible, combined with sub-second finality. And what we'll be able to achieve in decentralized finance on Sui. That is why we are super focused on bringing our digital infrastructure to Sui.
Awesome. So you mentioned that Franklin Templeton is a regulated entity. How do you think about, and as an investor, obviously you're concerned with like different regulatory regimes around the world where you invest. How are you sort of surveying that global landscape and contrasting? Are there places you're avoiding or places that you're really attracted to based on the regulatory environment?
Yeah, so Europe is certainly intending to lead the charge in terms of laying out rules and being very clear, making it easier for pioneers that we've heard from today and those of you out in the audience to build in a more transparent environment. The U.S. has been less friendly, but we've also had some developments from Congress in terms of stablecoin bills, and there are common denominators we see globally in terms of at least the stablecoin bills that have come out thus far. And so we're a global firm and we're a global fund. we are not necessarily viewing one sovereign as being a key focus right now. We do think that because this is a global infrastructure with global access, that ultimately, yes, the U.S. is going to have to play catch up and get on par, and until severely proven otherwise, simply because of TAM and market capitalization, you can't ignore the U.S. But we certainly embrace Mika and everything that's gone on over here in Europe as well as in Asia. And we continue to work globally with all those institutions that are happy to make a transparent sandbox environment for builders to work with.
How significant? So for regulators, obviously the SEC is a major regulator in the U.S. That they've approved the Bitcoin ETF. How significant? That to me feels like an indication that we're headed in the right direction. But tell me, am I tilting at windmills or?
No, and I'll give you one better. So the SEC, I won't pretend to step into their shoes and act as if I know what Gensler is trying to communicate. But I can tell you that, yes, on the one hand, it's positive that they approved the ETF. I can tell you, on the other hand, a part of what Franklin Templeton views as its value add to the Web3 ecosystem is working with regulators, using our 75 plus years of regulated experience to push forward the boundaries of blockchain. And you will see announcements from us this year, probably within the next few months, with significant developments that are approved by regulators that, again, will focus on closing this gap between the regulated finance environment and the crypto environment. And so to give you a preview of how we're thinking about that is, what if instead of going into a bank, you can simply open up your phone or your desktop in order to open up a checking account at essentially what is a US bank. And so the way that you could do that today is you can go into the Franklin Templeton app and you can buy a money market fund that yields generally more than what your bank checking account is offering, and you have all the safety and stability of a US liability without any counterparty risk from a banking institution in between. And you haven't had to step into a bank. The issue right now is that you go through Franklin Templeton's KYC AML process, and so you sit within our whitelist ring fence. And so what we're working towards is, how can we on-ramp you if you want to be within that regulated perimeter, right? Because every time that you essentially want to cross back into a sovereign's capital markets, you need to come back across that regulatory perimeter. But when you want to be outside in a cash-like experience, if that's a stable coin, you're allowed to have a large degree of anonymity. And so what we're working towards is, how do we bridge that by creating a bridge between what is an on-chain security that acts as a checking account and will be expanded horizontally to include many Franklin Templeton funds, a bridge from that regulated environment over to the stablecoin environment, eventually of your choosing, and then eventually have the ability to map all of your addresses, Franklin Templeton or otherwise, to an approved KYC AML provider, giving you now an on-chain identity for a sovereign that says, hey, I have KYC AML, so when you want to raise your hand and be approved for something that is in the on the other side of the regulatory perimeter in a security, you can, and you can get it, and then you can go back out and you can have that cash-like experience, so that if you want to go buy groceries, you can do it either with a treasury fund or any Franklin Templeton equity fund, or you can go back to that cash-like experience, and no one will know that you purchased those groceries from your local supermarket.
So you're talking about bridging between TradFi and DeFi. At what point do we get beyond TradFi and just start talking about Fi? Like, when do we get back to that?
So I think that this links to the next conversation that we'll have that will be super interesting. And so I do think that the two worlds continue to merge, near term as TradFi finds more and more use cases for blockchain. And then on the other side, as crypto invents these use cases that have widespread distribution that users don't otherwise generally have access to. I think that both of these worlds will combine. I think that there is a willingness on both sides to combine. In terms of TradFi is more and more recognizing the value add of blockchain. Certainly the next battlefront, the frontier is private permissioned versus public permissionless. Franklin Templeton, myself, we sit very clearly on the public permissionless side. There will be other financial institutions that will try to hold on to private permission because they want to hold on to that market share and essentially leverage that as a tax. But I do think that both of these worlds are merging. What we need to do is continue to solve problems within DeFi that we know capital markets have solved from an economic perspective, but are not easily translated technically to blockchain. And so one of the very interesting ones that is near and dear to my heart is figuring out how to bring deferred net settlement to blockchain. Blockchain is essentially a real-time gross settlement. It's a payment system. Nobody's really lending to anyone when there is a transaction to be had. But within capital markets, in traditional finance, everyone is lending to every other participant for free for whatever amount of time is required because they all make money off of volume. They all make money off of us transacting on them, and so it behooves them to not charge each other anything, but the only way you get away with this is with a legal and social recourse vehicle. They're essentially all part of the club at the exchange and at the clearing agency. And once you're a part of that club, it's hunky-dory. It's great. Everybody says, I'll give you free money for as long as you need it because I'm going to make money off of it too. But we can't address that, at least not yet in blockchain. We need to continue solving these problems. And I think that Deepbook on Sui is a critical piece of getting to solving some of these problems. And the reason that it's so unique, it takes an incredible team, particularly within blockchain. And I haven't let you ask enough questions.
Well, no, it's okay because as I'm thinking of the question to ask, you're answering it, so that's perfect.
I appreciate that. It takes an incredible team to take a step back from the ethos of what is blockchain, which is peer-to-peer decentralization. We just heard about LimeWire, 2000s. It's all about decentralization and thinking about, we have all these underutilized assets sitting out there in retail. How do we bring them on chain, or how do we bring them into production and increase utility? And the thought process is always peer-to-peer. The reality is there are certain circumstances where there's an architecture in which you stick an intermediary in the middle, and we all actually end up benefiting. And one of those examples is centralized exchanges. And the reality of it is also that it's virtually impossible for a decentralized exchange to compete with a centralized exchange on speed, because in decentralized, you have to pass a message to more than one provider. And so by the laws of physics, there's just no way around it. But that does not mean that we can't create hybrids of what exists in centralized exchanges and do that on a decentralized exchange to provide a better trading environment for securities or assets that essentially don't have a market today, in which intermediaries would create markets and we would all benefit from this.
Awesome. Well, we're almost at time. I really appreciate you coming on stage and educating me, and hopefully you guys got something out of it as well. thank you very much, and we'll keep having these conversations.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.